Soy Jorgensen, productora de la cinta. Voy a hacerles una primera pregunta y después, si levantáis las manos, os voy dando el turno. Quizás la primera pregunta que me gustaría haceros es un poquito específica, pero es cierto que prácticamente desde el primer fotograma, cuando una ve la película, queda muy impresionada por cómo se filma el paisaje y cómo se filma el paisaje y en relación a los personajes también que están oprimidos o liberados por él. Da la sensación de que el paisaje tiene una importancia narrativa. Quería preguntarte un poquito por esa cuestión.
Yes, the landscape does play a huge role in this film. It's almost impossible to ignore. When you live in these areas, particularly the rural Midwest, landscape dictates so much of the behavior. So I wanted the landscape to play a role in the film like it would be an antagonist or an unconventional character, and that it does dictate a lot of the dynamics and interpersonal dynamics between Haas and Will. And so I thought to give it as much attention as we did, the two leads, and it became such a setting, and it became so hypnotic for us that it was almost impossible to ignore. So yes, it does play a huge role in the film, and I'm glad that it also resonates with people in the audience.
Hi there.
Hi.
I wanted to ask about a couple of scenes I've seen in which I see a bunch of really creepy villagers show up in the corner of the frame and tell how they are seeing the situation.
Yeah.
So that's a very specific resource. I would like to know more about it. Like, why do you choose to tell part of the story like that?
Yeah. Voyeurs have a huge role in the film. I mean, we are all voyeurs when, as cinephiles, we're all kind of looking up on the stage and watching these narratives unfold or these tragedies unfold. And I wanted to show in a way that the private life sometimes feels dead, especially, again, in the Midwest where there are, fewer people there. So when something like this happens, when tragedy happens, it's huge and it's enormous. And so the story of Haas is she's been put on this stage and she didn't really ask to be put on the stage at all. And to me, that's sort of some of the most sorrowful moments of the film is when people look at her tragedy and try and make sense of it. And it's like, as we are cinephiles and we're watching films too, we try and make sense of these things that are happening and we put our own narratives onto it. And so that's what's happening in the film with the characters, with the voyeurs. It's like, there's some of these lines like, the group of women at the end, there's two shots. I call them the chorus shots or the Greek chorus shots. They say something like, I can't imagine what it would be like to be alone, And it's sort of them imposing their own fear onto this young woman. So I thought, hey, this might be kind of necessary to explore in the film.
Se trata de una ópera prima y quería preguntarle también a Joy, a las dos, pero también a Joy, cómo empezáis a trabajar juntas, en qué momento entra la producción y cómo ponéis un poco en marcha este proyecto.
I feel so grateful to get to work with MARIAN because she's everything you want in a director, and that she's creatively rigorous and collaboratively generous. And we've been working together on other projects in different roles for almost a decade. And so when Runner started almost 5 years ago, we embarked on this in a way that very much together, and I feel grateful that she invited me in for it because it's been such a beautiful experience to make such a piece of art and such a rigorous and creatively dynamic testament to this landscape and the people and her writing.
Yeah, and I'd like to emphasize that the film was made by a small group of hands. It was a very small crew of people. Some of us went to graduate school together, some of us met along the way in Indiana. And so it is about kind of building trust with your collaborators, and Joy has just been such an inspiring person to me as a writer and director because she's full of so much depth herself, and she's got so many amazing ideas, and she just executes things like with so much ease. So I think it is just choosing your collaborators wisely, especially if you're working small, which is what we did with this film.
Hello. I have more questions. I have all the questions. Do we know what happens to the girl after the end of the movie? She's in such a horrible situation. She's by herself, completely in debt. Do you have any idea? Or
I think that the most important thing is that she leaves, and that's what happens. It's like, relativity is such an interesting space for me too. It's to her, to us, it might feel kind of like a small thing. Yeah, she leaves her house, she leaves her town, but in these places, it actually feels very enormous. Leaving this life behind or leaving your histories behind. That's what she does here. She just sort of leaves her history. She essentially, lets the house fall to ruin. And that, to me, is just enough, or that's enormous enough, especially since these things are just relative to the place that she's from.
Hola, quería abundar en el tema de la fotografía. Quería saber si había buscado a ese director de fotografía en particular porque buscaba un efecto o fue una instrucción más desde la realización de buscar, esas texturas que tiene la película que la hacen tan especial.
The director of photography is... Oh, no, I'm hearing this, okay. Sorry, getting used to this. The director of photography's name is Jomo Frey. We did a collaboration together for my thesis film. And so we've streamlined a relationship and a dynamic where we work together very closely. And so he is such a talented collaborator, and again, a well of ideas. And so he brought with him his own, ideas and histories and things, and I brought mine as well. And I had written a lot of the film ahead of time. The script is, again, very minimal, and it's very, as you guys know, that there isn't a lot of dialogue in the film, but the script ended up being around 70 pages, so most of the shots had been written to a T. So the images ahead of time were built in my head, and some of it was changed a little with the locations and things like that, but for the most part it was pre-imagined, and it was maybe a little bit of a pain for some of the crew because we had to find them. We had to find this house, and it didn't exist before, and Joy and I drove up the Mississippi River, just to see if we could find it, and we found it pretty much at the 11th hour. And I have a background in fine art. I studied it in my undergrad, and I also just grew up going to museums too. So I have a little bit of a background or a knowledge of painting and photography. So that also had a huge role in it. And there's that classic Christina's World shot, if you guys know it. But we had we had picked that shot, we had picked that house, and I peeled off to the side and was just kind of looking around at the house, seeing what could be kind of exciting, and I went down a hill and I looked back up at the house and I was like, oh gosh, that looks so much like that painting. And so we're like, Jomo and I were like, well, we gotta put the camera there, obviously. And it's an ode to that painting in a way too.
And that's just from the production side, it's such a pleasure to work with a director who sees it so specifically beforehand, because then the goal of the team is to then be able to take these crystal clear images that you've had in your head and that you've collaborated on with Jomo and just discover them out in the world. And we were thankfully we had an amazing team in India, and we brought them out of your head, and I'm so glad to be able to show them here in Spain.
But also really a lot of credit to Joy, because we got in her old Honda Accord, her old beater of a car.
1992 Honda Accord, and drove up the Mississippi
color of
River.
champagne. And we just drove up the Mississippi River, and she was there for it 100%. So it is, you find the people who get their kicks, the same kicks as you do, and you just have fun with it. And we ended up just having so much fun with this film in a lot of ways, despite sort of the sorrowful content.
Si cuando tengáis preguntas, por favor, levantad la mano. Veo que en la primera fila...
Hi there. So I wanted to ask about the actress. She's fantastic. I thought she was amazing. How do you decide you wanted her? How do you work with her?
Yeah, Hannah Schiller is an incredible actress. She's based in Berlin, which is where Joy's company is based out of as well. And we had searched for her for a very long time. And we had some street casting, and then through agencies, and then Hannah just submitted through a portal, some network, and she submitted, and I almost didn't have a choice. She was just so good. She had so much power and strength, and the audition tape really doesn't have a lot of dialogue either, and so she just kind of carried this Vimeo link so well, and I was like, if she can do this here, she's going to pull this off so beautifully. And every single time I watch the film, she does something a little different that surprises me, and that is such a joy for a director, is for a young actress to kind of keep you on your feet, and Hannah just did that for me. And I wish she could be here today, and I wish she could have seen that room, and same with Darren as well, the young man. I think it would have just been such a huge moment in their lives, and I'm just going to be on the phone with them talking nonstop about what this has been like.
Yo quería preguntarte por el proceso de escritura del guión, porque es una película muy poética, pero también es una película minimalista y desdramatizada en su narrativa, y quería preguntar un poco cuáles son los códigos de escritura.
Yeah. There are a few. I love writing. I love to write. It's probably my favorite part of filmmaking. I approached this film in a lot of ways. I thought, well, the idea of writing a feature-length screenplay feels a little bit daunting. So, maybe I'll just write kind of a letter to somebody, and that's exactly what I sort of did. I thought, well, if each scene were a sentence, what would my letter say? And so I treated each scene like a kind of a sentence, and then it just started to build organically, and I kind of got caught up in the writing and the imagery, and then it became much more approachable to me and became really fun. And I think especially for first-time filmmakers, we're just like, we have to have this perfect script that's just plot and action, and that to me was terrifying. But if I was like, if this is going to be kind of a meandering poem, I think I can do that. And I ended up just having so much fun writing it. And it was almost, I know this can be sometimes, people can fall on different sides of this, but for me it was very cathartic to write it. And it was a little bit of a well for me. I just started to understand myself and my relationships, and I just kept wanting to pull from this well and keep writing it. And so that's what Runner ended up being, So hopefully it resonates with some people, but if anything, I feel like I've grown in the process.
Hola, sí. He hablado antes de referentes pictóricos, y es verdad que en la salida algunos compañeros hemos hablado de Edward Hopper, por ejemplo, como, posible referencia por el tema del paisaje y demás, y la arquitectura, las casas. Y también quería que nos comentara algo sobre los posibles referentes más puramente cinematográficos que tiene la película, porque también hemos hablado con los compañeros de Badlands, de Mar las Tierras, otras películas de Terrence Malick, que nos ha parecido que estaban ahí también un poco, ¿no?, en el espíritu de su película.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, the Hopper reference has come a couple of times, but I see it now when I watch the film, but I didn't actually think of him before. But I love Hopper's work, and it's incredibly humbling to, have that comparison. And same with Malick, too. Because we're in the Midwest and we're in the plains of Illinois and Indiana, the references, they ring true, and it's like sitting next to a giant with these names, with Malik. But I've always loved his work and his spirit too. It's definitely resonated with me. But I will say that my influences really run the gamut. It's sort of, again, the word meandering. They're everywhere. Cinema, I can go on about, the cinematic influences, but there's also poetry too, and there's a huge, at one point I was going to include 2 poems in the film in a bar scene, as these characters are toasting to one another, they're toasting in a bit of a poem, because they're one of my big influences in terms of writing. And then, photography too. Trying to think of specific photographers, but they're escaping me at the moment. But it runs the gamut, for sure. Wyeth, too.
Hola, yo quería preguntar por otro apartado técnico que es el sonido. ¿Cómo fue tratado? Porque en interiores especialmente a mí me llamó mucho la atención cómo crujían los suelos, como las escaleras, pues sí se puso especial énfasis en eso porque a mí me transmitía bastante en esos momentos. Gracias.
One thing, I feel so fortunate to have played at that theater today because it just celebrated sound just as much as it celebrated image, and I was so grateful for that. That does not happen. And so I had a completely different experience today, and one that I'm incredibly grateful for because I think I listened to the film more than I even watched it today. But sound was a huge part of the film and writing it, and we took a couple of weeks doing the sound design, and we worked with a really talented designer based out of Brooklyn, and we got down to every detail of things, the sound of her dress blowing and wanting to punch that up, or one of my favorite sound cues, there's 2, but one of my favorite sound cues is when they're running in the rain and they're running toward the house with the bike and they drop it, and the young man Will just spins in the cornfield, he's happy, he twirls, and we're just like, we gotta get the coat, we gotta get the sound of the coat. So yeah, there is so much sound in it, and I said this the other night, but it's sort of like an ASMR movie where the soundscape, you could almost close your eyes and listen to it too, and I think that I should have probably done that today to see if we pulled it off. But.
The sound details are so helpful when you're in this space because the poetry of Marian's writing is in the details, and working with Eli, the collaboration between Eli, Marian, and Parawan, who did the composing for the film, highlighted these tiny details that have been represented in the script and then get shown and pointed to in the soundscape.
That was another really joy of the film, was working with Parawan. He's such a talented composer, and I basically said very loosely, let's hear the sound of a bike on gravel in the score, and let's hear, I'm trying to think of the other, like the creak of the house or the horn that is in the boat, It's like, and she's like, okay, horn, and he just sort of made this really elegant score that just sort of is such an organic departure from the actual sounds of the film.
Es una película que mezcla muchos elementos clásicos y otros modernos y que retrata muy bien la paradoja de una comunidad migrante que parece de alguna forma anclada en el pasado y, por otro lado, un nuevo comienzo, porque se sitúa la historia precisamente en el oeste americano, ¿no? También esa televisión que parece que nos remite a la década de los 60 y, sin embargo, en algunas actitudes parece que estaríamos casi en el siglo XIX, ¿no? Quería preguntarte por este juego, ¿qué estabas buscando con este juego de los tiempos?
Yeah, I do get what you're saying, absolutely. This was a choice that we made really early, in the writing of the film. I kind of wanted it to feel a little bit like an elegy or an oracle or something like this, where it could really exist at any point in time. It wasn't necessarily 2022, because who wants to be here anyway? Or, in the past too. So we call it sort of an atemporal film. So we strive to have no modern signifiers, just the bare minimum of information that we would give an audience, like how much could we get away with? So the information that you really get is maybe a train, a house, a river. There's not a lot. And I think actually I've been surprised how willing audiences are to accept this as a reality and to go on this adventure and just to be completely transported into this sort of unusual space. And the last thing I will say is the original intention for that is in a lot of these small towns in the Midwest, it feels a little stuck in time. There isn't a lot of progress happening here. There's some of the same storefronts that have been there for years. And so there isn't, the thinking too is sometimes a little stagnant as well. So I wanted to play with that. And that's something I keep returning to in the films that I make. In the shorts, it's sort of the similar thing. I don't know why, but I just get my kicks from it. So that's a big part of it.
Hola, otra vez. Yo quería preguntar por la meteorología en la película. ¿Es buscado que esté así continuamente, tan nublado, lloviendo, o simplemente fue casualidad? Si influyó en el rodaje. Gracias.
Yeah, no, weather was definitely something that had been written before, and we just got so lucky with the Indiana skies. Like, we almost felt like we were touched by God or something in the filming of it, because first of all, we were such a kind of small production that, if one day wasn't quite right, would really affect our filming. But it just so happened that when it needed to rain, it rained, and when the clouds were heavy, the clouds showed up and were heavy. It was like, there's this one shot of the film, it's probably, I think, the most poignant to me, or one of the most poignant shots, where it's when Hannah, or Haas, is riding a bicycle after she's sitting with Will in the field. And she's on the bike, and she's feeling kind of alive from meeting him. And the sun starts to shine on her face for a second. And Hannah, just being such the brilliant and present performer that she is, she's just biking, and she feels the sun on her cheek, and she leans into it for a second, and you feel that joy. And then all of a sudden she keeps biking, and the sun goes behind a cloud, and again she's just in darkness. So I just was like struck by some hand of God or something. But Joy can probably speak to that too in terms of...
we kept the production really modular. So we had a few days that we would set up that could be interchanged based on when the weather came. And this was a testament to the crew's ability to stay pliable and stay flexible. So we would, all get, at the end of a shooting day, we would all come together, and we would, the heads of department and producers and actors would come together, and we would say, okay, I know this is what was on for tomorrow, but we have sun, and we hate sun. So we're going to switch, we're going to go interior, we're going to do our best to change everything around, which is extremely hard when you're working with the equipment and team and vehicles. And even though we're a very tight group, that was the way we could make the most of these sky blessings that we got, was to stay so modular.
And in the film, there's also a lot of discussion of rain as well, and like the metaphor of rain, In a way, there's a scene where the young man's on the telephone with his mother, and he's talking about how he picked this girl up on the side of the road, but in talking about her, he's also describing the storm. And I think it's like, a first love is a little bit like a storm. It comes to you like a cloud, and it can just sort of surprise you. And so she's a little bit like this storm that comes into his life. And I'm just so thankful for the clouds of Indiana for helping us push that symbol a little bit further.
Tenemos tiempo para una última pregunta. No sé si...
Sí, pues yo quería saber un poco sobre su próximo trabajo. No sé si van a volver a colaborar juntas, qué tipo de película sería, si planean crecer más a efectos de producción o seguir por esta vía de cine más intimista, más de película pequeña pero muy hermosa.
I would love to work with Joy again if she'll take me. This would meet my proposal.
I do.
You do? She accepts. Yeah, I hope we can work together again. I'm working on a new project, I'm calling it sort of like Loneliness as Horror. It's not much of a horror film, but I'm trying to kind of reappropriate that genre and what it actually means and what the word horror actually is. And for me, it's loneliness and isolation and alienation. So I'm working on something like that, and it's going to be probably a departure from this last film. It's been such an experience, even just screening this film so few times at this point, watching it in the audience, watching it with audiences, thinking, maybe I could go a little closer next time, or maybe I should show some faces, or things like that. So it's just been so inspiring, and it just makes me want to go home and not see anyone and write again. And so, yeah, we've got things in the books happening soon.
And I feel so, for me, when you find an auteur like MARIAN, all I want to do is make sure these images that come to her so brilliantly are able to meet audiences and come through the production process and get to people. So I think we're lucky that we have a lot of the crew and filmmaking team here through this festival process, and I know I'm not the only one who feels that love for her leadership and her vision. So.
Antes de ya despedirnos, sí que quería aprovechar que estáis aquí para preguntaros. La película en su fase de proyecto estuvo en varios labs, como la Cinefundación, y quería preguntaros desde la perspectiva tanto creativa como de producción, de qué manera estos laboratorios ayudan a los proyectos a salir adelante, y ahora que ya se ha concluido y se ha estrenado primero en Toronto y después en San Sebastián, lo mismo con los festivales de cine y las películas, ¿no? De qué manera pueden contribuir a la salida de las películas.
Yeah, I think we're enormously grateful for the labs. It is very isolating. You're writing, you don't know if it really resonates with anybody or if it fits, if there's space for something that you've been working on. So a lab says, hey, yeah, there is space. Let's spend some time and, give you, a place to live for 6 months, which is what I did with the Cinefundación residence. It was 6 months of just being able to write, and I was so grateful. That's huge for a young filmmaker, is just to have, a stipend to work, and I'm really grateful for that. And then we worked in the Torino Film Labs too, and that's where we met Nadia, our French co-producer, and it was just kind of a match made in heaven with Nadia too, because we just looked up to her and her feedback, and she just was so honest and also knew that we were raw, and that she gave us room too, and I'm really grateful for her for seeing something in the project. And again, also playing here, it's people who kind of take a leap of faith in you and say, I see something here, and I want to give you a time to really showcase it. It still surprises me when it happens, and today was probably the most shocking day of my life. And I just want to thank you for believing it, and for also just taking a risk and saying, maybe not everyone's going to like this, or maybe people will think it's interesting, but I want to bet on you, and I'm betting on you today, and I'm so thankful for that, more than I can even express.
That's such a lovely note to end on. I'll just say thank you so much too, and thank you to these labs. We met actually, when I think about it, we met all of our major collaborators through that. We met Pegasus Pictures team through that. We met Heretic, our sales agent, through that. We met the Easy Writers team through that. So if anybody has first features or is in that process and finds this somehow applied, these programs, because they do create that space and give you a trajectory to end up having an experience like this.
Yeah.
Muchísimas gracias a ambas. Vamos a despedirlas con un aplauso.
Thank you.